Good afternoon. I'm Ed Yim with WQXR, and I'm really so happy and honored to be here with a group of amazing creative people to talk about a really special moment in the New York Philharmonic season, and I think what's going to be a very special moment in the New York Philharmonic's history. It's the piece Émigré. It's a full evening. And I've been living with the recording and the libretto now for a couple of weeks, and I'm quite in love with this piece. And our goal is for those of you who are lucky enough to have a ticket for one of the two performances on February 29th and March 1st here in New York, we want to help you get the most out of it. And for those of you who do not have a ticket for one of those concerts, I think there are a few left, but not many. So if you're watching this and are compelled to go to the website immediately. But those of you who are not able to be there, there is a very beautiful recording out now on Deutsche Grammophon. You can listen to that. And we will hear a little bit about performances that might be planned in the future. So you can make the pilgrimage to hear this great piece. I want to start by telling just a very short story about how this resonates for the Philharmonic and for me personally, because the Philharmonic has had a relationship with the Shanghai Symphony and with the city of Shanghai now for almost 10 years, if not a little bit more. And I remember on one of our residencies, a retired violist in the orchestra actually arranged a tour of Jewish history of Shanghai, in Shanghai, with an amazing tour guide who was Israeli but lived in Shanghai. And a group of us went around to all the places and learned a little bit more about this piece of history, of Jewish history, of Shanghainese history. And that was actually a special moment for all of us to be together and experience that. So now that this piece has come into fruition, it just feels very natural and organic. So introductions, who's with me today? To my right is Mark Campbell. He is a Grammy Award-winning and Pulitzer Prize-winning librettist and writer. He's collaborated with people like Kevin Putz and Mason Bates. You might have heard of an opera called Silent Night, which is a great piece, and The Revolution of Steve Jobs, which premiered in Santa Fe and just recently did a very successful run in San Francisco. We have to his right the composer of Émigré, Aaron Zigman. Aaron is a composer who has worked across all musical languages. He has worked in concert music, pop music, film and TV music. He wrote the film score for a film called The Notebook, which is being turned into a musical, I hear. And he has worked with people like Quincy Jones, Dionne Warwick, Aretha Franklin, and my personal soundtrack of my college years, Phil Collins. And he's also written concert works for people like Jean-Yves Thibaudet and Alyssa Weilerstein and Inam Barnaton, all familiar to WQXR listeners and fans of music in New York. And then to his right is Brock Walsh. As I was looking up Brock's bio, I was very struck by his first job in Los Angeles out of college was as a backup singer for Linda Ronstadt. How cool is that? But since then, he's worked with luminaries like Quincy Jones again, Celine Dion, the Pointer Sisters. You are a lyricist, and we just discovered we have a very dear friend in Mary Birnbaum in common, the daughter of Leonard Bernstein.
Just had lunch with her.
Just had lunch with her. And then last but definitely not least, the director, Mary Birnbaum, who is on the faculty of the Juilliard School, the artistic and general director of the opera in Sarasota, Florida. Right?
Saratoga Springs.
Saratoga Springs.
Like,
the other
you're
direction.
not the first. That
Other
has happened.
direction.
It's a
Excuse
festival
me.
in the summer, in June and July.
Saratoga Springs, home of the racetrack and the Performing Arts Center in upstate New York. So don't go to Florida if you want to see Mary's work.
3 hours away.
Yeah. And she has directed some of the most important contemporary opera works of the past decade. Missy Mazzoli's Proving Up, Jeremy Denk and Stephen Stuckey's Classical Style, and In a Grove. And was it David Little?
Chris Cerrone.
It was
Stephanie
Chris,
Fleischman,
yes.
yeah.
Chris Cerrone and Stephanie Fleischman, and Stephanie is a dear friend. So, so it's great to have all of you here. I want to start with the origin story of this piece, Émigré. Who got the first call from the conductor Yu Long saying, I have an idea?
Well, I did, and it was about the end of 2019. So that's when he first reached out to me to start try to arrange a meeting. Gave me a little bit of background, well, a little bit more than a little bit of background. And he just said, this is one of my most important projects I've always wanted to make, and I want to put it in your sphere.
Did you know him before he called you, or was he just an admirer of your work?
I met him in 2016 randomly when I was dying to go to China, and I did a film score there, or worked on a film score there with John Wen, and we met just at a dinner, and then about a year and a half later, in conjunction with Jean-Yves Thibaudet, he asked me to write a piano concerto for him.
Right,
It was
and
a three-way commission.
That would be the piece Tango Manos.
Tango Manos,
right? Yeah. Great. And so he called you and he said, I have this idea for a piece, for an opera, oratorio, music drama. I think labels are not important here. It is a full-length evening with a dramatic story to it, with great music, yeah? And obviously Long has a great love of and history with the city of Shanghai, and he wanted to tell this story about his city. Yeah. And you said yes, and then you said, I need collaborators. So who did you call next?
Well, after about probably a 4 to 6 month search at the most, somewhere in between there, I discovered the great Mark Campbell. And of course, I had already done something with Brock, just a piece that I had written, but before that related to kind of my excitement about doing the piece. But we needed somebody to really, was a great dramatist and a great librettist, and also, Mark, I felt in the beginning that I knew that eventually the two of them I think would be a great fit. But yes, I reached out to Mark to be the central dramatist.
And you did not know each other or had not worked together. You just, one of Mark's operas was something that you really liked.
So yeah, especially the first one that immediately told me that this would be the right fit was Silent Night. Was the first one I studied.
Great piece.
Great piece.
Yeah. Did you just start listening to a lot of contemporary opera to
I
see
did.
what resonated with you?
I did. I mean, I'm such a huge fan of the old guard, of course, just post-World War II, the greats like Carlo Menotti and the song cycles, Barber and so on, and many other things. Yeah, I started burying my head and studied a lot of modern opera scores, and Mark just seemed to keep coming, and I have to mention that, Mark was turned on to me by our dramaturg, Laura Stansfield Pritchard.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then Mary, this was not staged in Shanghai, but so this is the staged premiere of Émigré here in New York later this month. Who called you into this?
The beloved Mark Campbell, who I've gotten to work with twice and who has the keenest sort of understanding for like a character's journey through a song. And when he said, I'm doing this piece, we've been working on it, I want to see if you're interested in working on it. And then I started reading up about the time period that I had no idea about this story and the safe haven that the Chinese gave 23,000 Jewish refugees during this period, and was blown away, and I had to work on it.
Yeah, amazing. So that's a great segue that of that's what moved you, is you learned about this episode in history that you didn't know about, and you wanted to be part of telling that story, right?
Totally, and the idea that the Shanghai Symphony and the New York Philharmonic were collaborating. The reason why I love opera is because it is a universal language, and music can bring us together. In my earlier days, I had the opportunity to direct Otello, of all things, in Taiwan, and it was one of the greatest collaborations ever because no one spoke the same language in the room. So we had no recourse except to dig into the music together.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, talk about cross-cultural harmony and seeding peace. Like that's the ticket. So
Yeah.
I knew I was in for a penny, in for a pound with this one.
Yeah. Random question, actually. I found myself wondering this as I was learning the story and following these characters through their journey. If these were real people at that time, what language would they have used? Does anyone have a theory or a guess? Or
In Shanghai?
yeah, the Jews in Shanghai, the Shanghai speak, actually there's Shanghainese and there's Mandarin and, et cetera.
I can venture one. You can too, Aaron. You go.
Well, the Ashkenazi Jews probably from Western Europe probably would have spoke Yiddish, a lot of them, and German and Yiddish, and I imagine, English as well.
Yeah,
and
that's what I found.
You think
that was
English
super
might have
interesting.
been the...
Well, yes. So the Phil has reached out to this entire group of ancestors, of survivors, or people who were born in Shanghai, or people whose families came from there, and both Chinese and Jewish, and Russian Jew, and also German, Austrian Jew. So sort of two classes of Jewish people. And they talked a lot about a school that was started on the boat over to Shanghai, an English school that somebody would run under deck, below deck, and that it transformed into a school once they got there. And a lot of their relatives went to the school because they realized no one was going to hire them if they didn't speak English. And it was such an international port, there were so many English people there already.
That's a
So
good point.
that's so fascinating because I initially thought, oh yeah, it's like this place where everybody's speaking a different language and like this magical musical thing is happening in the piece. But it is really possible that the Song sisters, who are, upper middle class, daughters of a pharmacist, and Joseph, who could definitely have taken English, in school, would
Yeah,
really
that's
be
true.
speaking in English.
Right.
There was actually a first draft of a scene where he came to learn English, and he was going to be
cool.
taught. But Aaron came up with a better solution.
What was the better solution?
To have him? He was a doctor, so he wanted to learn about Eastern medicine.
Yes.
And so Aaron suggested, why don't we create like an herbal Eastern medicine shop, and that's where they meet. And
Yes.
that made it a lot easier.
As opposed to at a language school.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or he was going to, I think one of the daughters spoke English and would teach him Chinese.
Okay.
And that was, it was one of those ideas that we started to look at and then went, yeah, well, that's going to be complicated. Let's find something better.
And what ends up happening is she shows him around Shanghai.
Yeah,
which
I
is
love that scene.
It's magical.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Shanghai is a very beautiful city. This idea of it being an international city, I think, was true even then, right? I mean, there are
Absolutely.
certain cities in the world that are of the world more than they are of their country necessarily, don't you think? Like, I feel that
One
about
thing-
New York or London.
Shanghai had a fantastic jazz scene.
It was called
Yeah.
Paris of the East. They
Yeah.
called it that.
Yeah.
Routinely.
Paris of the East, exactly. Paramount Club.
Yeah.
and some
Did
things.
Long have the idea to tell this story about this chapter in Shanghai's history and in Jewish immigration through a love story from the get-go, or is that something that you all developed?
It came from Aaron.
That was
actually.
something that I kind of wanted to construct in it, because to kind of eliminate some of the difficult, if you will, just come out and say it, some of the tougher stuff that dealt with some of the political issues, and to make it more of a story about hope, loss, refuge. Of course, the commonality between the Chinese and the Jews, a sense of being persecuted in their own countries, which they were, as we all know.
Yeah.
And I think that bond, and of course, Jews have been coming, as I'm not trying to give a history lesson, but had been coming to China for many, many hundreds of years. Kai Feng in 8 AD, and through Persia, all kinds of different Jewish sects, but the cause and effect obviously was the Holocaust for them to get over there.
I mean, we should probably take a beat here, and for those who haven't been living with the piece like all you have, like it just, without giving any spoiler alerts, just like outline like who the principal characters are, and kind of, because we mentioned the meeting in the herbal medicine shop. So Mark or Mary or anyone, can you just give us a little like
You wanna start?
who are we following in this, and kind of what's happening to them without giving away all the moments?
It's interesting that you mention a love story, because I've been framing it in my mind as there's so many love stories that happen simultaneously. There's a
Right.
love story of these Jewish refugees with the city itself. There's a love story between these two brothers. So two brothers escape from Germany, and they, in the backstory, get given a visa, which allows them to come get to leave Germany
Right.
to come
And these
to
are the
Shanghai.
brothers Joseph and Otto.
Joseph and Otto, exactly. And when they arrive, each charts kind of a different course. Joseph's going to be a doctor, and Otto's going to be a rabbi. And Joseph, through his wanderings, finds the song shop where he meets Lena, the daughter of the youngest daughter, and they fall in love.
Right.
And simultaneously, Otto goes to the yeshiva and meets the daughter of the rabbi there. And even though he really doesn't want to fall in love with her, he ends up succumbing to her charms. And they sort of chart these two love stories simultaneously, and we see how they work out as history takes its course, and the Japanese sequester the Jews into a smaller, like a 1.1 mile square ghetto in Shanghai.
Yeah.
And the war gets harder, and bombs are dropping on the city. And then at the end of the story, I'm not going to ruin it, but tragedy and future and survival ensue.
Yeah.
I think it's important to view this story as the story of, in this story we have the father who is a traditionalist, the song father is traditionalist, as is Yaakov, who is the father of Tova.
Right.
And both of those characters hold on to the past and hold on to the separation of these two cultures.
Yeah.
And I would say that this story is about, this is the consequences of countries that hold on to the past and rely on separations rather than mergings of culture. We face this all the time in this country, of course. If we keep burning bridges, we won't be able to build them. And this is a song, it is a tragedy, and it is basically because these two cultures are not moving together.
Right.
And
They're trying to stay apart instead of coming together.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's so sad because, of course, when Shanghai did allow Jewish refugees in from Germany, I think there were only two countries, China and Dominican Republic,
Yeah.
that permitted Jewish refugees in 1938. And that's the really sad thing. But then the story, the love story, if you will, is also just shows what happens when two cultures are not going to listen to each other and learn from each other.
Yeah. I want to bring Brock into the conversation because it's a little bit unusual for a piece like this to have two writers working on it at the same time, and obviously harmoniously because the piece came out so beautifully. But how did you what parts was Brock, were you responsible for, and what parts was Mark responsible for?
He
and
mostly
how
did the prepositions, and I did the conjunctions. I think you got the verbs, and I got the nouns. Yeah.
I'm great with verbs.
Yeah.
No adverbs used in this.
Yeah.
oratorio.
That
I'll
was
take
something
credit
we
for
decided.
a few conjunctions. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
It's actually kind of a simple explanation. First of all, I learned so much about oratorio writing by watching Mark Campbell. That has to be said in advance. I was brought on when Aaron encountered a piece of music which he had written prior to any lyrics being written. And since he and I, Aaron and I, had a long history of writing songs together, pop songs together, I'm accustomed to writing to an existing piece of music. And Mark was open to the possibility that, since this is an area that he had less experience in, that perhaps it would be a good thing for us each to adhere to the thing that was our strength and make room for each other. And, it's awkward
in the beginning, but over the 4.5 years that we worked together, I think I can speak for both of us. My respect for him and admiration for his talents is full on, and there's no competitiveness. There's just, let's make every inch of this territory really special and really true, dramatically. And
well, I think the proof is in the pudding. In that, as I was reading the libretto and listening to the piece, I could not tell where one person wrote one part and another person wrote another part. It's one story told in a consistent voice.
I think that has to do with Aaron again, with the music, and also his original idea of this story. It came to me first before it actually came to Brock, but I think so many decisions had already been made dramaturgically about how this love story should happen. And then it was just pretty much up to me. I mean, Aaron and I think went through the libretto and we sort of said, this is where there's a song. This is a song.
Right.
And then I think because that foundation was laid down pretty strongly and firmly, that it was very easy for Brock to come into the project. And when I think of what he contributed, I mean, I did give him the one comic song, "You Bastard." And,
is that Woman's Hands?
Yeah, Tova's song.
Mr. Bastard.
And then he got the beautiful, there's a really beautiful, the final song in the piece. He and Aaron wrote this really beautiful moment of looking back on the tragedy of what happened.
Yeah.
But your advice about the tone that song should have was, in my mind, foremost during the entire writing of it.
What was it?
That we had to leave a sense of hope with our audience.
Yeah.
We had to look away from the tragedy that happens and find some hope.
Yeah.
And
Not go to the
Mark
obvious.
was absolutely right.
Yeah. So I asked this question with love for this piece that we all know and that is part of our vernacular, and not in any way to say, oh, this is just another version of that, because it's very much its own piece. Émigré is very much its own piece. But was there a whisper of Westside Story that flitted across your mind of these two star-crossed lovers? And
I think I can't say there was a whisper, but I don't think it's. I think it's unavoidable to have Westside Story in pretty much every new piece we write. It's just part of our the way we think of stories, and it's was such a important revolutionary. I mean, I think it changed musical theater permanently. It's interesting to me that Sondheim wrote the lyrics for that. And,
yes.
And then he went and took the form even further.
Yes. Yes.
I think,
Aaron, what were you
I
gonna
think
say?
I can step in. The thing about, if you want to use that slide comparison, which I've never used, the only relevance to me about you mentioning West Side Story is just the construct. Leonard Bernstein wrote a lot of the melodic content first.
Yes.
And Sondheim followed his phrases.
Right.
And that's some of the things that, I mean, this is a beautiful, the end result of what the three of us did is a construction of kind of, all of that, in a sense. There's some times where Mark gave me prose first and some, so it's all, but I would say, the majority of, it's probably cut down half and half, where I had the melodic in the tunes first, and that's really how I wanted to at least construct the song element of it, not the, obviously not the recitative, but so that for me, it would be worth it to take on this experience. That's what I really stressed in the beginning.
It's one of the things that I found very satisfying about listening to the piece, and since we're talking about Steve Sondheim, who Mark, you knew very well, I remember reading something where Sondheim said that his beef with a lot of contemporary opera, not all, but a lot of contemporary opera, is that it was endless recit and no big moments for the characters. And as I listened to Émigré, it was like, oh, there's this landing place, there's this moment where this character is having a big song, a big aria. There's a duet where they're having a big moment. That's very much sort of what you look for in opera, isn't it?
Sure. I mean, like, I'm very much a traditionalist in opera, and I get torn apart for it, but I honestly don't care. I love those big moments in opera. I feel that's what the audience wants. That's why we go to opera. We can't express those big moments. I mean, when you think of Epiphany and Sweeney Todd, none of us can walk down the street singing Epiphany, but we watch it and we go, yeah, I've felt that before. And that's an operatic moment.
Yeah.
Sorry, I chose something from musical theater instead of opera, but
The lines are blurry.
it applies. And I think we do look for that in opera. I think for those great big, I mean, I wrote an opera based on The Shining, and what makes me so happy with Paul Morvick, what makes me so happy about that opera is that I actually think it's scarier than the movie and the book. Because of music, because music is an abstract form, it's an emotional form, and it can make words so much bigger, emotions so much bigger.
And why turn a story or an idea into an opera or a form adjacent to opera unless it does that?
Absolutely, that's what I teach. I teach a lot at American Opera Projects, American Lyric Theater, and all over. And I tell my young composers and librettists, if you don't want to do this, then maybe you shouldn't write opera. Go ahead and write a play, you know. But it's those big moments. And the thing about this piece is that it's big moment after big moment after big moment.
Yeah.
I want to sing
pretty
these
amazing.
two guys' praises for a minute.
Yeah.
When we were in Shanghai and watched the Chinese premiere of this show, we were fortunate enough to have English subtitles. Now, we wrote the darn show. We shouldn't need subtitles. But I found it an amazing aid listening to songs which these guys had written, and I had heard and knew, but had never seen performed live. It's you say big moments. They're sometimes very quiet. You guys wrote a number of pieces that are really, really quiet and so powerful. I looked over at my wife and I were in tears. There was no big dynamics to anything. It was tiny little moments. But the power of the lyric writing and the power of the melody writing made it a big moment.
I would say that about the pieces that you were responsible for too, Brock.
Well,
Yeah, I would too.
Well, they're big, but some of those are big.
Yeah.
You know.
I think maybe it's wrong to call it a big moment in terms of, you know, it's like the whole chorus and the whole orchestra going at 90 miles an hour. It's a moment. That there are moments,
Well,
whether they're
also
quiet or subtle or huge or...
And each character sort of gives their philosophy on life through their arias. Like
Yeah.
I'm right in the middle of like Act 1 now and thinking about.
You're in the middle of staging rehearsals right now, right?
Well, I'm not. No, I'm just working alone.
Okay.
We stage for a very short amount of time before we open, but so I have to communicate everything very, very fast.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that each character comes out and says, "This is my standpoint on the world as it is right now," and whether or not that world is actually visible on stage or if it's something that's going on in another continent, the thing that they're going through is so big, even if their moment that they're actually living is small.
Yeah.
I think that's what's powerful about it too.
Going back to the story, though, can you help people who are going to see this or might see this at some point or will only know this piece for a little while via the Deutsche Grammophon recording? What had just happened in Shanghai as this story takes place? Like, what was tell us a little bit about the setting, not like, you know, what was Shanghai nightlife like, but like, what had this city just been through?
Well, the city, I mean, there were, starting in 1932, there were starting to be attacked at various moments. I wouldn't say huge, bloodedness kind of attacks, but they were starting to get attacked. At that point, there was a lot of friction between the Japanese and the Chinese at that time.
The Nanking.
And then, of course, the Nanking happens in 1937.
Can you tell us about the Nanking Massacre?
Yeah, one of the things that really, I actually could not say no to this is just because of when I read, there was, in 2002, I read Iris Chang's book, Rape of Nanking, And it was basically her grandmother had survived this genocidal period of 3 months, and it was in the wintertime of 1937. So happens to be a year before the Night of Broken Glass, Kristallnacht in Nazi Germany. So there was just all this relative, and it really, and I learned, and I knew about the Shanghainese diaspora in, say, like, I learned about, say, maybe 85, 86. Dear friend of mine, very kind of a mentorish type of older figure, was a Shanghainese refugee, taught me and told me a lot of stories about this. But it didn't really click in until about 2002. Like, wow, this really happened, and I didn't know about this.
Right.
And then but Long's approach was really not about the friction that was going on, you know, because I think there's a really beautiful relationship now between, you know, in Asia in general, between the Japanese and Chinese. I think there's a lot of love between both cultures. So, you know, that would be fair to say. So he didn't press that as much. It's just history is history. And
He
things
didn't want to
happen.
highlight the tension
Yeah,
between...
he wasn't about highlighting those type of. His whole deal was about the Shanghai Conservatory and his grandfather Ding Shanday, who taught there, and ironically, I already knew I didn't know that his Ding Shanday was related to Long, and so it was kind of like all these different. 2 degrees, 1 degree, 3 degrees of separation that really forced me to say, you know, I have to do this. I couldn't turn it down. But Long was so excited about and so proud of the culture of Shanghai and what they were able to do, and the music that he was able to continue to, you know, to support. And as you know, he's a world-renowned conductor, and his family and his grandfather is a major part of this whole thing.
Yeah,
I mean, you know,
very distinguished family.
Yeah.
So Shanghai has just gone through a very traumatic period, a violent period, with the massacre being part of its recent history. And Kristallnacht happens in Nazi Germany, and so Jews start fleeing Europe, and Shanghai becomes one of the places that they go. Can you talk to us a little bit, maybe Mark or Mary, in your dramaturgical research? Why did they go to Shanghai? And how is it that a city that had just been through so much trauma on its own became one of the 2 places in the world that would accept Jewish refugees?
You wanna go, Brock?
I learned something this past weekend, courtesy of a lengthy piece in the Sunday New York Times Magazine, curated by 6 or 7 historians on the history of the British mandate in 1939, which forbade European Jews from emigrating to Israel.
Forbade
Yeah.
them
They
from
said
immigrating
you
to
may
Israel.
not go to your homeland.
Huh.
Right? So this was like squeezing off all the other conduits where Jews could go. And then the other thing I just want to mention, and this is courtesy of our moderator of Monday night's panel, Jonathan Kaufman, head of the journalism department at Northeastern University, who wrote the great book, The Kings of Shanghai, which formed the spine of my understanding of the
Last
history.
Kings of Shanghai.
Notwithstanding the discrimination that Jews suffered at the hands of Japanese and being sequestered in ghettos and so forth, we wanted to make our story a love letter from the Jews who were admitted to Shanghai to the people of Shanghai, to the
That's very
citizens
interesting.
of Shanghai. Not so much the governments, the people. The people taking a 3-month voyage from Europe to China, and the citizens of Shanghai that received them.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry.
Well, it'd be remiss not to say, one of the really instrumental people in Austria, the Chinese ambassador named
Yes.
Feng Chongho.
Yeah. Very
This
nice.
gentleman was responsible for getting at least 7 to 8, maybe 9 more, 1,000 visas. Who knows? But that's
He was
we can start.
he was in the Chinese
He was the Chinese
embassy
ambassador in the embassy in Austria.
in Austria.
And then he got a letter to kind of stop doing this, and he kind of was, his career was at stake. And then he refunded out of his own pocket another embassy to do this. So, I mean, if you were not out of Nazi Germany by 1939, you were, in Austria, so what happened is if you didn't get that ride and that safe haven to Shanghai through this gentleman at that period, which would have been in 37 is when he got over there, end of 37 probably. You wound up, you were going to, they were sending Jews to Dachau and Buchenwald.
Yeah.
And and he actually was responsible for actually even getting Jews out of Dachau to get over to Shanghai before the doors just completely slammed shut.
It's incredible the difference that one individual made, right?
And it's also worth underlining that Shanghai was open. So they didn't need a visa to go into Shanghai.
So that's one of the reasons why that became a release valve.
And it was one of the only places that hadn't made a quota of some kind.
Yeah,
So.
right. Okay.
And you were right about what you just said. The Jews couldn't get out of England in that period of time, and they were stuck. They couldn't even get to they couldn't get there, so they wouldn't let them emigrate. But one of the things I wanted to say also about the two of these brilliant gentlemen is, both of them, and I kind of, of course, I already knew about Brock, but when I started studying Mark's work, which is so brilliant, the two of them have such a beautiful command of the English language.
Oh, yes.
And it's just, I think today we're living in a really incredibly beautiful musical world where it's almost like anything goes in a sense. There's so many trials and new things people are trying, which is great because that's how things evolve. But I think for me, I always have to go back to my influences and remember where I come from in history, but I'm always open to new ideas. But I knew that the two of them, I remember when I had sent the song to Mark, he said, Mark was well, he was very impressed with Brock. So I was like, great. And then the two of them just eventually really established a brotherhood. And that made it all very symbiotically much easier for me.
Yeah. So just for people who don't know your music or don't know that they know your music, Aaron, tell us a little bit, very briefly, like who are some composers that you love so that we know kind of where Aaron Zigman comes from?
Well, I started, my roots are classical first. And, right off the bat, if I go, Shostakovich, Ravel, Bartók, and, and of course, I would be remiss by not saying what a Leonard Bernstein, fan I am.
Yeah.
Just studying many of his pieces, and
I'm struck by the fact that Bernstein's music, like his language for the musical theater and his concert music language, were so different from each other. But when I listen to your film scores and TV scores and think about Émigré, it feels more like the same person talking. I love many of Bernstein's concert works, don't get me wrong, but it feels like he was wearing different hats, and it feels to me like you're wearing the same hat no matter where you're working.
I try to. There's certain things we were only allowed to do. In film, you're serving what the film is and what the story is. I will admit, in the beginning of my career, after I did The Notebook, I got into a slew of being known for doing romantic comedies and things like that, which is a very difficult genre to do because you have a lot of opinions and a lot of things. And I'll just be straight up honest. I prefer just the dramas and serious dramas. And not that I don't love the people and the things that I've done, and I'm very grateful for all of that. But I really.
But your heart takes you to
my heart's into, Bill Evans and Chick Corea, Louis Armstrong, and Ray Charles, and I mean, it goes
Next to Shostakovich,
goes,
Ravel,
yeah.
and Bartok and Bernstein.
I mean, one of the things that always cracked me up, but because I've read so much about, and we wouldn't have enough time to in Bartok and just all the, influences, and of course, Britain and the whole syndicate. We could go on and on. We don't have time, but the thing that it was really intriguing to me, and this may be an incorrect quote, but it was told to me, or one of the, I don't know if it was testimony or one of the memoirs or biographies I read on Shostakovich, that he wasn't a big fan of jazz, which I find hard to believe, because his chordal and harmonic sense, I mean, there's actually, in the entr'acte, there's one harmony, it's a violin solo that starts out, that's part of the violins, that is the violin solo before I end with, I'll just say it, I do my own, in the end of the entr'acte, it's an arrangement.
yeah.
I came up with the Avinu Malkeinu, which is
Yeah, there's a beautiful concertmaster solo at the end of the entr'acte.
right, and then ends with the cello over Avinu
I can't wait to hear
Malkeinu.
Frank Wong play that, assuming that
Yeah.
he's playing concertmaster at the Philharmonic that week.
But there's certain harmonies that Shostakovich wrote that, I'm very influenced by him, that it's almost, there's certain chordal expressions that he will have. It almost doesn't matter what modal scale is played over it, the chord will work. That was part of his, he was just an absolute genius, but
Well, it's good
that's
to
one of his things that really
It's good to
struck me.
know where your musical loves lie, because I think that helps understand the music that you write.
Yeah, I only wanted to be a film composer so my concert works would be heard. But even though I love writing scores,
Yeah.
I'm just saying that was my
Yeah.
kind of like, I stopped working on records in 98, and I took 2 years off.
But if any studio executives are listening, he didn't mean that.
No, I love writing film scores, and in fact, all
No,
that
it's
stuff.
not
but
either
just,
or.
It's I love music. I
Well,
just love the music.
casually and geniusly, Aaron said on our last Zoom call, he said, well, opera is the film of the 18th and 19th century. Just like without thinking. And I who spend most of my days listening to arias from the 18th and 19th century with students, it was like, oh, yeah, you're right. That's exactly right.
I
So-
worked for a conductor named Christoph von Dochnani, who was music director of the Cleveland Orchestra for many years, and he said, if Wagner had lived in the 20th century, he would have been a film composer, 100%. Yeah. Mary, I want to talk a little bit about the staging, without giving away any coup de théâtres, but I worked at the Philharmonic for many years, and we did some wonderful theatrical things during that time, and they will continue to do them. But it is a concert hall first. How are you going about turning it into a theatrical space?
Gently. We're starting in the concert hall, and
Yeah.
we have an idea that this feels a little bit like a contemporary vigil for everybody who's far away from home. So we'll start with a little bit of a candle lighting from a patriarch on the Chinese side and a patriarch on the Jewish side, to kind of kick off the story. And then we'll kind of slowly travel back in time, and across the seas. And we have a kind of a beautiful feature. It's an Art Deco style screen that mimics the wood of the concert hall, upon which will be projected beautiful images by Josh Higgison, who's the projection designer. Crit Robinson was the scenic designer, and then Yuki Nakaze-Link embedded some lights in very interesting places. So we'll have that sort of sense of the energy of Shanghai, which is the thing that I was kind of most worried about conjuring in the space. The other thing I knew, because the characters are so fascinating and different from each other. Everybody has a really clear standpoint, both on the city and also on how they're going to live during the war, change or not change. That I knew that we needed beautiful costumes that would really give us a sense of who the person was right away on the first viewing. And so Juana Botez has designed really incredible. We talk about memories that are contained on the body, that are worn on the body, and then all of these people kind of wear their either literally like the Jews who came with sewn objects inside of their jacket linings because they could only leave with $4.50 from Europe, or with the Chinese characters who have this sense of embroidery of like, you know, the sort of classical, the way the city used to be. So with those design elements, and then the sense of the hall as like both a place that is now and a place that can transform into then. And 80 choristers, not to mention, who will be led by Malcolm Merriweather, that sort of open our brains to something like really epic and not something that we get to see every day as patrons of the arts in New York City, or even people, you know, going to a concert at the Phil. Everything will feel, I think, larger than life and out of the ordinary.
Yeah, the sense of event that this piece, I think, is creating in New York. I was speaking to all of you a little bit before. It reminds me of a moment in Philharmonic history that is really vivid. There have been many vivid moments in Philharmonic history, but in particular, the New York premiere of John Corigliano's Symphony of Rage and Remembrance, and how they brought the AIDS quilt into the hall, and it was a moment of remembrance and prayer and acknowledgement. I feel like this piece is going to do that for us at a very difficult time in the world. And when you wrote it, you said a 4.5-year process, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the world has never been an easy place, but as this piece comes into fruition, we're in a particularly difficult time in the world, in the Middle East, in international cooperation. How is this piece landing for you as the creators at this moment of its premiere, in terms of what you hope the message of it will be at a very tough time for so many people? Tough doesn't even begin to cover it. Tragic.
Well, I mean, the two words for me that just keep, it's like a repeat. It's just sadly timely. And that's, without getting into specifics, you know, it's tragic what's going on right now in the humanitarian sense. It's amazing. Like, I can just reflect on my experience in being in Shanghai. I mean, the orchestra and just the people were just. I've been to China 6-7 times, and I've always felt good going to China. But this time I was there for 3.5 weeks, the longest period. And the Shanghainese, it's a mixed orchestra, so there's other people from all walks of life in the SSO. So kind, so generous, so giving, so wanting to you know, just to connect. And it only took about a day or two, and I just felt like I was at home. It really felt like I was, you know, in my backyard and with my, you know, with friends I'd known for years, even though felt like I was transported in time, being kind of in where we were staying, which was in the old French concession, so to speak. And but it's just I find that in music, you know, just even working, whether it's New York or Los Angeles, you meet so many people from all kinds of walks of life, and music is and I think we could all attest to, is a language that, you know, doesn't have, it's just its own thing. It just relates, and it's a form of communication that's so beautiful.
That transcends
that
many
transcends
things.
the barriers and bridges the divide.
Yeah.
You know?
Boy, do we need that.
I also want to say a word about how important it is for cultural institutions like Shanghai Symphony Orchestra and the New York Philharmonic to form an allyship during these times. We like to think, I'll say this, I think it's great to think that maybe art can sometimes lead the way to reconciliation, to peace, to understanding. This will always be the case. We will always be telling this story.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately. But maybe we can make a little dent in it. You know, that's the most we can hope for, is making a little dent in the way the world treats itself and other people.
By pointing out the things that they have in common more than the things that they have dividing.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's why I think this allyship is also really, really important.
Yeah.
It's something I'm very excited about. I would love to see more of that happening. For one thing, I want to go to places like Shanghai, you know? I want to be traveling. I love being able to travel in this country, but, you know, I can't wait to go to the other places that I hope this piece goes to.
I want to remind us all that 4.5 years ago, when Aaron told me about this piece, he was emphatic about stressing the themes that he wanted us to pay the greatest attention to. Now,
And what were
obviously,
those?
the historical element is imprinted on the story and should be, and we stand by it. But he was insistent that the humanitarian concerns of everyone be held paramount to the political. And I mean, there's always going to be cruelty in the world. Governments are always going to do things that harm one another. People are always going to be called upon to show compassion for their fellow man, regardless of what nationality, ethnicity, or otherwise. And that was the theme that he stressed from the very beginning. And then 5 years went by, and the world changed. And here we are.
And those themes were even more important than when
Well,
you set them out.
because they were well chosen in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel 5 years from now we'll be having the same discussion.
That's
10
right.
years, 15 years, you know.
We don't have that much time left, but this has been really wonderful and inspiring. Thank you all. I'm going to ask you each to maybe mention a moment in the piece as director, creators, composers, all the things that all of you are, that you want the audience that is going to be lucky enough to see it coming up in New York at the New York Philharmonic, or maybe later. I understand the piece will make its way. There are plans that we can't specify yet, but to Germany and the UK and Hong Kong in future years. Maybe you all will take a trip there to see this piece, or call your local symphony or opera company and say, you need to bring this piece to our city. But tell me about a moment in the piece that, now that it's completed and it's been birthed into the world, that you want an audience to, maybe it's a quiet moment, Brock, that you mentioned that they might miss, or like there's something that particularly you felt came out exactly the way that you wanted it and you want people to notice that. Can we start with Brock? Do you want to?
Thank you for the question, because you get to talk about your favorite, one of your favorite moments. And again, I took my cues from Aaron story-wise. He was very careful to say what he felt the arc of the character was over the course of a song. And Tova was given a moment to address sexism.
Yeah.
And I was empowered to write a song for her where she complains about the treatment of women in an oratorio that's going to be staged in mainland China first, and it's situated in the 1930s.
Yeah.
So that was a delicious, it's like I can say what a woman would say in 2024 and put it in the 1930s.
So that's a moment in the show called A Woman's Hands.
In a Woman's Hands.
Yeah.
She's,
It's sung by my friend Diana Newman,
that's right.
So
who's
brilliant.
wonderful.
And I'll just finish by saying, at intermission in Shanghai, I walked out into the lobby, and about 6 women lined up to thank me
I love that.
for writing a song of feminist
That's
song,
great.
a feminist lyric.
That's great.
So,
Aaron, I wanted to ask you actually, incidentally, like the musical language of that song of A Woman's Hands, like I couldn't quite, like it's, I thought, is it a tango? Because I know Aaron loves tango.
It is a tango, and it's just simply a tango.
Okay, cool.
But yeah.
Yeah, great.
I mean, and of course, Mark, we all, there was a lot of dialogue between Mark and Brock in this about Tova.
Yeah.
That's one, I think Mark has always said Tova is one of Mark's
Tova's my favorite character.
Yeah.
Well, let's come to you then. What's one of your favorite moments in this piece that you've created?
I hate
Mark?
being so like. It's a lyric, and unfortunately, I wrote it, so
That's okay.
I don't like talking like that.
Own
but,
it.
I like that you said own it. Thanks. There's a song that begins the first act called "Light of Flame," and I like that it offers the audience, everyone watching, that there is hope for humanity, that what is going on in the world then and what is going on in the world now, we still have to believe that there is a better way.
Nice.
And it's just a short phrase, light of flame, and it just, I don't know. And Aaron said it beautifully. I guess that would be
It's a moment you're proud of.
It's a moment that I connect with.
Yeah.
I don't know I don't know how to be proud of work. I think that that's a funny thing. But I connect with the moment. It's simple. It's not a
It's a prayer.
Complicated. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a prayer.
Yeah, wonderful.
I can
Mary, oh sorry.
Oh,
Aaron.
no.
Oh, we got
I was going to give you the last word.
Yeah, I love that. Yes, that's a good
Mary,
idea.
what's the moment that you find particularly juicy as a director?
Really excited about two of the people who were in the archival group, the group that has collected around being in Shanghai during this time, had really significant stories about Gone with the Wind, and how their parents had seen Gone with the Wind during that time, and it was like all the rage in Shanghai. It played at all the movie theaters.
Interesting.
And Shanghai had a very active Hollywood of the East scene too. So in my invention, Lena is like a film buff, and she has a sort of a fantasy. She has this song called "Dreaming Must Wait," a duet. And it's all for her about the fantasy of what the life could be if it sort of was glossy and Hollywoodish. And so we're putting in the magazine that she's reading in Mandarin, we're putting Gone with the Wind pictures and sort of the costume designs from that time. One of the people in the group, her parents, after leaving Shanghai, decided to move to Atlanta because that was the only place they knew from Gone with the Wind.
That's a brilliant
that
little
amazing?
Easter egg to look for
Yeah.
in the performance. Thank you for that, Mary. Aaron, I mean,
I'll make it quick.
I was going to say it might be impossible for. You really you were steering the ship with Long Yu, and But is there among the moments that you?
Well, the first, I'll be very brief because I know we're closing. First of all, the cast, I have to point out, Diana Newman, Megwei Chang,
Shen
Shen Yang, Andy Duan, the whole cast is just incredible. We are so lucky to have this cast.
True.
And I have to say, you were commenting on something about Lena or something. Megwei is just such an incredible dramatist.
And it's a gorgeous
So
voice.
beautiful to watch on stage and how she delivered. Everybody. Matthew White. So, but let me get to answer the question. For me, I'll just go very briefly. The prologue to me is a setting of where we start, and of course it goes into our song Shanghai, and that's to me very meaningful because it's quiet and it sets up the cause and effect, and it's something I worked very, very long. So and then I'll jump up to No Word From Home, which is basically a scherzo, but a death march of the pain of Jews getting straddled in cattle cars, and that's not just indicative of Germany, when Nazi Germany would happen. It's in a lot of other.
And that's the two brothers thinking about and worrying about the people they left behind.
Yeah, that's their parents probably that wound up in cows. And then I'll jump to so that's the first act, and then and then the second act, the few things that really and of course and then the ending of the first act, of course, which is that dialogue between, it's a very contentious dialogue.
It's the two fathers
Mark-
of the two lovers.
Right, and everybody.
Yeah.
People are not enlightened yet in any
Yeah.
shape or
They're
form.
like, stay away from each other.
Stay away from each other. Yeah, stick to your side of the fence.
A boy like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
The
and then in
dance
Act Two, Mark said it already said it. every time there's, you cannot deny my love is every time I listen, we used to listen because I recorded it, it just makes me feel like I'm in ancient China for some reason. And I worked very hard to implement Asiatic kind of sequences in a sense of harmony I tried not to be literal. And that was a big challenge. Yeah. And that's why I studied a lot of Asian composers that are amazing, like Qinggong in Paris, and I could go on and on. And then the last thing I'll say is of course, Nowhere to Go. And I was so happy that Mary had me doing this additional piece to really complete the narrative. And that was, it was actually Mark and Mary and ending with how we end. And so that's kind of my little portrait.
Thank you all. This is an incredible team, and we should end actually where we started and just acknowledge that part of this creative team and really the voice of Shanghai was part of this team through Yu Long,
Yes,
who
absolutely.
Yes.
not just the
Absolutely.
conductor of the piece, but really part of the creative
The
team.
real hero of today is not here.
Yes,
You
indeed.
know,
Yeah.
and I wish you
But
were.
we think of Yu Long, and we appreciate that he started this project and that he was an important voice in the creation of
He was
this
the
work.
inspirationalist. And,
Yeah.
and again, I'd like to thank also the, SSO, New York Philharmonic, and just that, like as Mark said, that symbiosis just and everybody.
And for those of you who are watching this as we lead up to this premiere, do go to the New York Philharmonic website. There are pre-concert lectures with people who grew up in the Shanghai Jewish ghetto. There's a panel discussion the week after the premiere that's interesting about what is the American voice in music. The Philharmonic is really taking this moment to be about music, but to show how music can resonate with so many different areas in life. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Ed.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah.